Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Say hello to my newest member of this channel. This is Mr. Fluffles. His name is actually what he is. Super fluffy. He's like a little baby, so he's like wild. He's doing his thing over there, and let's see how long I can keep him inside here, because I like to have him outside of my studio as there's a lot of stuff going on here and I don't want him to do anything he's not supposed to do, especially here with fabrics and so on and so forth, what he is doing right now. So let's see. As of right now, he's about 2.5 months old, so approaching 3 months at Easter. And he's just super cute, but also, a little baby and sometimes very annoying, but we know. For today's video, I thought it would be a good idea to do a second... He found his toy, okay. To do a second version of one of my most popular dresses that I've ever made here on my channel, which is my milkmaid's dress. This was one of the first patterns I ever uploaded to my shop, and which also made my shop and channel grow really well. So thank you so much for that. I thought because of the critiques and stuff I heard over the years from you guys, it would be a good idea to, do a new version of this sort of dress. I'm not gonna update that pattern from there because it's that design and it's a standalone thing, but I'm gonna do a new version of the milkmaid's dress, which is going to have puffed sleeves similar to the top that I'm wearing right now, which is also something I made on my channel, which you can check up here if you're interested. And then I'm also gonna have a corset part down here, which I did a whole bunch of embroidery on. This took me a whole day. Yesterday, I spent the whole day preparing the embroidery because I did on every single panel that I did a unique embroidery that I think will look really nice. This is the front, and I wanted to do a monotone kind of embroidery, so I had to take a thread that's not supposed to be used for embroidery, so the thread just dripped on me all the time, so it was a whole thing. Obviously, if you use the specific embroidery thread, this is not an issue. Lesson learned, or not really a lesson learned. I knew that that's gonna happen because I didn't have that specific thread in the color that I wanted, so that's the risk I took, and it took a long time because of that, which is fine. Okay, now's the time where we're going to say goodbye to this little boy because he is out of control and just exploring and scratching and all of that on my sewing supplies. So he just got into my interfacing. Bye bye. So we're going to do a non-lined dress today, which is therefore also rather beginner friendly, as it only has one layer and everything inside is just gonna get overlocked. But I also, on top of that, if you can see here in the background, I mapped out and draped the corset and top part of my dress. I am going to do some nicely laced necklines because I have a few trims that I want to use, and I'm going to bind the edges, or not really bind the edges, but I'm going to use bias binding to finish the neckline especially. So that's what we're gonna do today, so I am super excited and I hope you are too. So let's start with the video. So we're going to start off with the corset part, just to have it all sewn together and out of the way. So you're gonna find multiple pieces. I'm just gonna lay out one half so that you can see what it looks like. This is the front piece that lays on fold. Now, check out the embroidery that I did on here. I am so pleased with how everything turned out. I really like this look. I did all different kind of embroideries from the same collection, I guess. So what we're going to do is just close all of these seams right here, leaving the center back seam open, as we're going to use a zipper there. So I'm just going to put right sides together and close the seams here. This is the front dividing seam 1. And then the second one, the side seam, and the back dividing seam. And this is what it ended up looking like. So we're going to iron everything, and I'm still debating whether I should iron everything open or to one side. It really does not matter too much, but I think since I want to do some fake, I'm not sure yet, boning channels on the outside here. I think I'm just going to iron it towards the one side and then always towards the back, all in one direction. And then I'm just gonna offset the boning channels towards the back and not like in the center of each seam. I think that's what I'm going to do. So now I'm just gonna grab my iron and iron everything towards the back. I have this sort of same colored bias binding right here, which would make really neat boning channels if you put it on each seam, or I'm going to offset them like this. I think that'll look really, really nice, and it's also going to kind of hide the edges where I did not place the embroidery correctly, and it's like in my seam allowance here, which if you put something on top, it looks more supposed to be like that. I don't know. I'm still learning with the embroidery machine how to place everything, how to do stuff, and so on. So this, for me, is a huge success that I was able to do like this variety of embroidery designs on a piece, and that I had the stamina to like pull through, even though the thread was ripping constantly. So that's totally fine to me. I just want to make it a little bit prettier by adding the boning channels here. And then I'm just gonna work my way from the back, starting from the back, towards the center, so that I have like a little bit of practice before I go to right at the front. This is how I'm going to offset the bias binding. And usually you would put it dead on the center of the seam. So it doesn't really matter too much. I'm just going to use my seam allowance as boning, as I'm not going to use the boning channels, but this is just, if you just put everything to one side, it's just going to act as somewhat of a boning, as it's just so thick. So that's what I'm going to do here. Of course, if you don't want to add boning channels, which is super optional, so you don't have to do that at all, you can just leave it as is without any top stitches, or you can just simply top stitch the seam allowance down. Either or is fine, whatever you feel like. I think for my personal design here with the embroidery, this separation of the panels just helps it come together a bit more, rather than just having the embroidery sections just like placed next to each other. So that's why I chose to do the boning channels, which are, by the way, fully functional boning channels. So if you want to, you can obviously also bone this underbust corset with these bias tape channels that I just sewed in. I would be able to use 3mm wide boning for this as well. So whatever you feel like to do for your specific design, honestly, you're the designer here, don't forget that. So with the underbust basically done now, so this is all that we're going to do. This is what it looks like from the inside. So everything is also neat and tidy, like sewn down and overlocked, and I also overlocked the center back as well. So let's continue with the bust portion and the shoulder portion. Okay, this is how everything is going to end up being sewn together. As you can see, the bust panel here is way too big for this small section of our bust seam, because we're going to gather both of these sections here, so the upper and the lower part, the bust seam, which is this one right here, and then also the shoulder strap and the neckline. So let's start with the bust seam right here. I'm just going to use my biggest stitch together. I'm going to do a double seam without back tacking on either end, and then I can use my bobbin thread to gather nicely. And then I'm going to do the same for this section right here. So from the side seam all the way to the shoulder strap notch of your size, and then from the shoulder strap notch of your size all the way to the center front, I'm also going to do a gathering stitch. The neckline we're not going to pull yet, we're going to do that once we have the piece on, because we're going to pull it and adjust it to your size. So this one right here gets gathered to the size of the shoulder strap, and the lower portion right here gets gathered to the size of your front bust seam. Also another thing, which is probably pretty stupid, especially since I put so much time and effort into the embroidery, but I did not sample this dress yet. So what you're seeing on screen right now is basically my sampling, which can go awfully wrong if it doesn't fit. But since I draped it, I am kind of hoping that everything is working out. Obviously, this is something you should never do, because especially if you put so much time into preparing your pattern pieces and then it ends up not fitting, it's obviously super bad. And also same goes to if you work with like really expensive fabrics and so on. So I always suggest to do a sample before you sew this in your fashion fabric, and you should sample it in a fabric that is similar in behavior to your fashion fabric. So I'm using 100% cotton, which is like a super easy fabric to work with. Since I draped it, and I know that my dress form is to my size specifically since I made it myself, you can check out the video up here. I know I get a lot of questions about my dress form. I am fairly confident that this is going to end up working out. So that's just a heads up. Don't do as I do. Do as I say. So now I gathered my bust section, and to actually determine the final length, I'm going to pin my center front, which should lay on fold for your piece, onto my under bust center front, and then I'm just going to take out however many gathers I need in order to like fall onto the dividing seam here, the side seam here, with my stitching line. So my side seam is right here underneath, and this is my seam allowance, 1 centimeter, which goes further that way. So I'm aligning my stitching line, which is right there, with the side seam, and that's just in order to determine the length. And then I repeat the same for the other side. And I have 2 notches in my bust seam here, so I can even out the gathers and make sure that the notches actually match up with the dividing seams. So I can just also pin them in place and then use that to even out my ruffles. The upper part up until the notch gets sewn onto the front shoulder strap. So I have a lot of length to ruffle up. I'm going to put another layer of fabric onto here as a backing because I have the interfacing visible here on this side, which I don't personally like. And same as for my bust seam, I'm going to match up the notch with the stitching line of my shoulder strap and then the side seams, and then I can gather to the size of my shoulder strap. For the neckline, you can just gather it down to any size, but not knot it off, and then we can adjust it later. I'm sure that also an elastic would work really well here, or a drawstring, so you also have a lot of options to ruffle it down. Here in the neckline, whatever you feel like, honestly, it doesn't really matter. It's up to you and your design and your preference. Okay, but now we can go ahead and add the front shoulder strap to the ruffled up section here. You're just going to put right sides of the shoulder strap together with the shoulder strap seam in the bust. The notch is indicating the stitching line again, so not the edge of the pattern piece, because we still have seam allowance in here. And then here the side seam is just matched up normally, and since we gathered it to size, it should just fit perfectly on top. Just even out your ruffles here and then sew this together. Same to the other side here. Okay, this is what it looks like. Make sure that you did not cut off the gathering threads here for the middle section. Otherwise, you're gonna have to re-stitch and regather, so that's just something that you have to watch out for. I'm going to iron the seam allowance into the bust piece so that it puffs up a bit more. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to kind of flatten the ruffles at the side, because it can look a bit unflattering if there is like a lot of ruffling going on here. So we want the most part of volume in the front here and not so much down here. So I'm not pressing too much, I'm more like steaming, and I can also use this opportunity to even out the folds and like create smaller folds rather than these flat folds that tend to form, something like that. You can also do that by just pulling on both ends and it forms different folds. So like this. If you want to, you can understitch the seam. Doesn't really need to be. I overlocked this part though, because this is going to be raw otherwise. So overlock this and then you can understitch if you want to. And now we can do the back piece. This is going to get sewn together here. I like it better to have the side seam open when I put my sleeve in. So I'm just going to put the shoulder seam together here by just putting right sides of back and front shoulder together like this. Close this, overlock, iron towards the back, and then we can do the sleeve. So for the sleeves, what I like to do at the very beginning is to do a double gathering stitch into the head of the sleeve, reaching from the front to the back sleeve notch. So from here to here, doing a double stitch again. And then I'm going to finish the hem of the sleeve with just a double fold and then top stitching at 5mm, because I'm going to add an elastic about 3 cm, maybe 4 cm. That depends on you, however you like it best. I would say like 4 cm right here, so that it's going to sit nicely on your arm, similar to what I have on at the moment. Actually, exactly what I have on at the moment. So we're gonna replicate this sort of sleeve, and then I'm going to gather, put it into the arm's eye and close the side seams at the very end. I'm going to cut off, or already cut off, 2 pieces of elastic for my hem. So what I did, and you can do that on yourself as well, is just where it's going to sit. So in the middle of your upper arm, you're gonna put a piece of elastic and then measure around your arm and stretch it a teeny tiny bit so that it sits there but it's not uncomfortable. You're gonna cut that 2 times for each sleeve, 1. And after I measured the elastic, I'm just going to probably draw a line 4 cm higher than, or 3, I'm gonna do 3 cm, really doesn't matter, higher than your hem, and you're gonna sew while you pull the elastic and then just top stitch it right on top of this line right here. I can now gather the sleeve cap to fit my arm's eye, and I do that by just pulling on the bobbin thread again. And I like to also use my actual arm's eye for this, so I can determine first of all which side this goes. And I can see that with the notches here, so I know that this is the front notch. So this has to go here, because these should be the same length, the notches. My notch is right here as well, and it matches up with this notch, same to here. So what I like to do now is to find my shoulder notch, which probably would have been wiser to just mark it before gathering, and just pin it onto my shoulder seam. And then I'm going to do the same for my side seam and my notches, like this. And then I can see here that I still have to gather a bunch like this. Now the length is correct. And here I'm also going to gather a teeny tiny bit like that, and now I can knot the gathering stitches, cut this, and now I can even out the ruffles and make it look pretty and sew the sleeve in. I overlocked the sleeve seam right here now, and I can also iron the seam allowance into the sleeve. So I'm gonna start here at the underarm, and once I come to the ruffles, I'm not gonna like iron, but I'm going to basically steam from the right side of the fabric with the seam allowance pointed towards the sleeve like this. And with all of this prepared now, we can go ahead and close the side seam. So let's fold the back piece right on top of the front piece and close the side seam like this. And the seam allowance gets ironed towards the back or open, doesn't really matter. I think I'm gonna put it towards the back. And once we turn everything right sides out, we have this really cute top part right here, which we're going to attach to our underbust corset. So what I like to do for that is to put my corset piece right sides up, and then I'm just gonna fold down my bust piece, or like shoulder, whatever, like this whole combination, right sides on top, match up the center front. I'm also going to match up the center back and the side seam. In the back piece, upper back piece, you're gonna find a notch that indicates the back dividing seam as well. So match that up with that corresponding seam in the corset. And then here in the bust area, you're gonna find the 2 notches for the 2 front dividing seams as well. But since you already prepared everything, it should just match up like this. And the notches should also match up accordingly. So I'm just gonna pin it in place and repeat the same for the other side. Just like this, and now we can close the bust seam. Okay, this is what it looks like. Looks really, really cute with the underbust corset embroidery and everything. I'm really, really pleased with how this already looks. The seam allowance just wants to lay upwards because this here is thicker and stronger, so that's where we're going to iron it towards as well. And here with the folds, I'm not too worried to flatten them. As I already said, this up here is the most important part for the bust part, so it's fine. I'm just not gonna go over everything like up here. I'm just gonna iron the seam allowance down there. Also, I made sure to overlock the bust seam as well. Depending on however you made the underbust corset, this might be a bit tricky because it's getting really, really thick. So, you know, you might be better off with bias binding or something like that. That highly depends on how good your machine can handle thick fabrics. I had to struggle a bit because I don't have the best machine, so it's fine. Probably I should also just change my needles. So this is what it looks like. Basically, the whole top is already done, and we can go ahead and do one of two things. Either do the neckline however we like, and I'm gonna use like a lot of trim and also bias binding to fold everything towards the inside. Not sure how I'm gonna do that yet, but that's the plan. Or we can put the skirt on. It's a circle skirt that measures the exact length of this like shaped waist, so the hem is also going to sit higher and lower in places, which I think looks really, really nice. So that's what we're gonna do for that as well. Okay, I decided to go with the neckline, and what I will be doing for that is just a simple small cotton trim. If you watched last week's video, you already know this trim. I also used it for the corset that I did last week. And I'm just gonna put it like right sides onto here so that this is gonna end up showing. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to sew in the bias binding like this. I'm not gonna unfold it because I want only like 1 centimeter or so still free, so that once I fold it, it's going to cover everything like this and have like a really neat finish on my neckline. So if you don't want to do that, you can leave out the trim, obviously. You're just going to do that without the trim here. So just put it right sides on here without unfolding it, and then you fold it to the back, iron it, and then also fold it down, and then do another row of top stitches, or you can do a whip stitch on the inside so that you have an invisible stitch. But before you do that, you have to adjust your bust line here, if it fits or not. If it doesn't fit, take it in more or just make it a bit bigger. Okay, with the bodice now done, we're going to do the skirt. I cut out a lining skirt as well, which I'm not gonna sew in as a lining. I'm just gonna have it laying underneath, like with all the seam allowances still visible and stuff. I'm not gonna do like too much of a thing about it, but I'm going to add this because it's just gonna be more comfortable while wearing it. This is not a slippery fabric, it's cotton, as I already mentioned. This is going to wear up while wearing the dress. That's why I also cut out the same pattern piece, same amounts, you know, like 1 front piece that lays on fold and then 2 separate back pieces. So in total, 3 skirt pieces plus the lining makes 6. And I'm just gonna, you know, put it together and then sew the waistlines of both of these together and treat it as one layer. Let's put both skirt layers together separately and then sew them together. I'm just gonna put the side seam together here. So right sides together, sew and overlock, and same to the other side here, sew and overlock. And same to the lining. Okay, that's what it looks like. I ironed the seam allowances towards the back. And now I'm going to double fold the hem and top stitch it to hem the skirt. Okay, with both skirt layers now done, I'm going to put the lining skirt with the seam allowance facing onto the seam allowance of the fashion layer skirt right on top here. And as I said, this is optional. You don't have to do a lining skirt. And as you can see, I cut the lining a tiny bit shorter so that it's not gonna peek out under the skirt. And basically what we're gonna do is use this as one layer of skirt and put it on our bodice. Now, as you can see, there is like this pretty crazy tip here in the center front. So this is going to align with the notch in the skirt. And I'm gonna show you what I do for that. I am going to mark my stitching line in my bodice, which is 1 centimeter measured from the raw edge, as that's my seam allowance. So I know right there is going to be the stitching point that has to match up with this point right here. So notch measured 1 centimeter inwards, or however much your seam allowance is. And I'm going to cut into the seam allowance of my skirt so that I can pin the skirt from 2 directions onto the bodice. So right towards the point, and now I'm going to go through here. Needs to match up with this point, align the first edge with the skirt, and then tilt it like this. So this is going to open up like that, and also pin this in place. So this is going to have like this corner open right there, and you're gonna sew right over here. And now the rest just gets pinned to the bodice. Normally this should be exactly the same. Probably, since this lays on the bias, the waistline of the skirt, it's probably going to be a bit wider than the corset, as there's no give to the corset. You just have to ease it together. They are the same length, it's just because of the bias of the skirt that makes it a bit wider. And I want to be extra careful to have both of these skirt layers like sit perfectly at the edge of my corset and not one a bit further down than the other. Like this. And now I'm going to sew the skirt on. And that's what it looks like. I also went ahead and just top stitched the trim on that I used for my neckline. And it's already time to put the zipper in. So let's do that really quickly. This is like a really long zipper that goes from all the way up here down into the skirt. You're gonna find a notch here, so that you know until where you put the zipper. I've covered zippers on my channel a whole bunch already, so I'm just gonna brush through this right here. Put right sides together. I want to have the plastic stopper right where my green fabric ends, and then without stretching anything, I'm just gonna work my way down and pin it in place. Obviously, if you can, use a zipper in the same color as your fashion fabric. I just don't have any other zipper at the moment. I'm struggling to find one that is 60 centimeters long, so I just have to hope that everything works out with a 55 centimeter long one, but it should be fine. It almost reaches towards the zipper notch down here. So then I'm just gonna make a new zipper notch like right here and only sew towards that one. I'm gonna transfer the placement to the other side as well, and I'm gonna sew this in. And now with the zipper closed, I'm just transferring a few points like the top here so that I can use this as a guide for the other side. Then my dividing seam here, my trim. And then I also like to mark my notch like this. Now I can open the zipper back up and transfer these placements to the other side. I like to keep the needles, the markers, in, so under the sewing machine stuff moves, but you still know exactly where to hit the seams. And then once you actually sew over it, you remove the needle. And with this now, I'm gonna sew all the way down to the notch and the other zipper side in. And once we zip everything up, you can see that the lines all match up really nicely. So let's iron this. You can either iron this now or once the skirt portion is also closed. So especially here at the embroidery section, I really want to close up the visible zipper somehow. And since I didn't have a zipper that has the color of my dress, this is kind of what I have to deal with. It's supposed to lay like this, you know, so that the embroidery lays nicely. But I'm not sure if I can do that with how I have the zipper sewn in here now. I think I'm gonna leave it as is, and if it's open up, which it's definitely gonna do, then that's what it's going to be, I guess. But lesson learned, I'm gonna be careful next time. Okay, anyways, for the lower portion in the skirt, we stopped at the zipper notch, so we can just sew everything together from the zipper notch. And I like to do like a 1 centimeter gap between the stitching of the zipper and the stitches of putting the skirt together. And I want to continue the stitching line of the zipper. So like visually, you know, like I'm gonna start right here, but technically I could connect this and it would look really nice from the outside. So I'm just gonna put the right sides together here, matching up everything. Just treat this as one layer. And then that's it. Maybe I'm going to add some trim to the hem. So that's something that you can do as well. If you want to, like decorating this, you can basically do whatever you want. So let's close the center back. And lastly, let's iron the seam allowance open. And it's probably a wise thing to just bar tack the trim down here. Otherwise it's just gonna, at some point, be visible from the neckline. So I'm just gonna fold it in and then down like this. And gonna do a horizontal back tag where the stitching line already is, like in here. And that's it already for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I am super excited with the outcome. I love the embroidery and like this cute ruffled dress basically, so super excited. I can't wait to see your guys' designs, so make sure if you sew this dress, the link to the pattern is down in the description below, to actually send me the pictures over on Instagram, for example. You can tag me. I see all of your posts. Sometimes I'm even commenting on it, so thank you so much. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you'll get notified every time that I post. I post Sundays, so you can keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, if you haven't already, go ahead and check out my social media, which is linked in the description box down below as well. I'm uploading like tips and tricks all around my projects every week, so don't miss out on that. So thank you so much also to my channel members. If you want to support me that way, you can become a channel member with exclusive benefits. But the most direct way to support me and keep videos just like this one coming is to head over to my Etsy shop, where you can find this pattern, but also so many other patterns. I have over 70 now, so thank you so much. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!